have our debate for today. Title of the debate? What was the title? Weimar politicians were responsible for Hitler's rise to power. Okay. Everyone ready? So which one is the proposing team? So we have the proposing team that agrees to that statement on my left, while the opposing team who disagree with that statement will be on my right. So give a round of applause for everyone. Okay, so we are going to start. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to push your point forward, and then we finish from one side, which is the proposing team first. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, and then lepas itu baru we move on to the opposing side again, 2 minutes or less, yeah. And then after that we can have the rebut session. All right. Okay, shall we start? From proposing team. Mark and Marks. Time starts now.
Me and my members stand firmly with the proposition on the motion of Weimar politicians were mostly responsible for Hitler's rise to power in January 1933. Today I will be focusing on the political weakness and loss of faith in democracy, while my other teammates will further elaborate on their specific points. Hitler did not rise through brilliance alone. He rose from the ruins of a democracy that had already begun to falter. The Weimar Republic born from defeat, death, and division promised freedom, but instead they delivered frustration instead. I will start off by exposing the political weakness that tore the Weimar Republic apart. Hitler didn't rise solely through strength, but mainly he rose because the politicians in power were too weak to defend their own democracy, which is why we believe Weimar government is responsible for Hitler's rise to power. Let's begin with the system itself. The Weimar Constitution introduced proportional representation, which allows every party, no matter how small they are, to enter parliament. It sounded democratic, but in reality it created chaos. Between 1919 and 1933, Germany had 20 different governments, each lasting then a year. Even Chancellor Gustav Stresemann admitted to a speech in the Reichstag in Berlin on October 23, 1923, that people cannot have confidence in a government that changes every few months. This constant instability meant nothing could get done. To German citizens, democracy seemed weak, messy, and useless. As when everything is in chaos, people became much more desperate and they would do anything to find someone who would help them.
30 seconds.
In the end, the Weimar government failed, and that is not because democracy was too weak, but because its leaders were too divided to defend it and its people were too disillusioned to believe in it. Its weakness, its loss of democracy, and its loss of trust did not simply allow Hitler's rise, they made it inevitable. The Republic did not fall with a revolution, it fell with hesitation, it fell with fear, and it fell because those in power chose to be silent over strength.
Good. Continue.
But political weakness was only one of the story. Behind the chaos of government, the nation crippled by economic despair. The crisis that deepened public anger and pushed more Germans into the army of extremist parties like the Nazis.
Okay.
To those who believe power can never rise from weakness, this is for you. I stand before you as the second speaker for the proposing team. I'll prove that it was the Weimar's government devastating economic mismanagement, their blindness to suffering, and the failure to act that turned a wanted nation into the perfect breeding ground for Hitler's rise. The economic failure of the Weimar's government were not accidental. They were the result of a weak leadership, short-sighted policies, and a refusal to protect the very citizens who had placed their trust in democracy. From the hyperinflation crisis to the devastating effects of the Great Depression, Weimar leaders repeatedly failed to respond effectively. They printed money recklessly, imposed harsh budget cuts, and left millions unemployed. This mismanagement didn't just destabilize the economy, it shattered public confidence and left ordinary Germans vulnerable to the exploitation by extremists. Picture this: a mother standing in line for hours, clutching clutching a basket of worthless paper money, praying it will buy her a single loaf of bread before the prices doubled again. A father, watching his life savings worth vanish overnight, not because of war, but because of the government. Incompetence. Children starving while their parents burned banknotes for warmth because money had become cheaper than gold. This wasn't just suffering, it was desperation. The kind of desperation that erodes faith in democracy and makes people reach for any solution, no matter how extreme. And that is exactly what Hitler offered. He promised jobs for the unemployed and bread for the hungry, pride for the humiliated, and a vision of strong united Germany. In that suffering, Hitler found his opportunity. He didn't create the desperation, he exploited it. That is why we as proposing team stand firm that Weimar government is responsible for Hitler's rise to power.
Fine. Next.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the third speaker for proposing side, I strongly stand by our argument that the Weimar government failures were the key reason Hitler lost power. My focus today is on the social consequences of Weimar weaknesses, how they failed to unite, protect, and guide German society in a time of crisis. So my point is the resentment towards Treaty of Versailles. When the Weimar leaders signed the treaty in 1919, many Germans felt betrayed and humiliated. Germany had to pay 132 billion gold marks in reparation, lost 13% of its land, and was forced to accept full war guilt under Article 294. These harsh terms caused unemployment, poverty, and deep national shame, and the Weimar politicians were labeled as the November criminals. Hitler used this anger perfectly by promising to tear up the treaty, rebuild the army, and restore German pride. Because the Weimar government failed to protect the nation's dignity, Hitler appeared as a strong patriotic savior. So, without Weimar failures, Hitler promises would have fallen on deaf ears. That's all.
Okay.
As Speaker 4, I strongly believe that the failures of leadership and management of the Weimar government contributes to Hitler's rise to power. One of the Weimar government major failure was their decision to open Hitler as the Chancellor on 30th January 1933. President Paul von Hindenburg believed that by appointing him as the Chancellor, they could control him. However, this appointment allowed Hitler to take control legally and gave him the chance to undermine the Weimar government. As a result, this whole idea of giving the authority to someone who had the impact on destroying the democracy enabled Hitler to rise to power. So let's be clear, Hitler didn't just rise on his own. The Weimar politicians opened the door for him. This wasn't a revolution from the people. It was a mistake from the top. They weren't victims. They were the ones who set their own government up for collapse. Another greatest failure of the Weimar government was its frequent use of Article 48, which allowed the president to take control and make laws without asking the parliament. In 1930 to 1932, President Hindenburg issued Article 48 a total amount of 109 times. With this, people lose trust in the democracy because it ignored the voices of the people and over-relied on emergency powers. Hence, this made the democracy look weak and it paved the way for Hitler to rise to power. This proves that Weimar is responsible for Hitler's rise to power.
Seconds for that. Okay. Next.
As Speaker 5, I won't be able to say whatever our proposing side because I'll be saying the rebuttals for the opposition.
Okay. But would you like to summarize whatever that your team has in this meeting?
I'll be thank you everyone for giving their valid respective reasons, especially to the previous speakers. From now onwards, I'll be taking it from here. As speaker number 5, I'll be saying as demonstrated.
summarize your pointers, proposing team.
As the system of Weimar system made people lose faith in democracy, which is speaker number 1. And for speaker number 2, we talk about how Weimar's poor economic handling made people desperate for change, which is the Great Wall, the Great Depression. And for speaker number 3, we talk about QOP. And speaker number 4 talks about how Weimar made a mistake by making Adolf Hitler as chancellor. That's it.
Okay. How are you going to pass it through the next team?
Now I'll be giving a chance for the opposing side to give their statements.
Okay.
The opposition firmly disagrees with this motive. Hitler's rise to power cannot be blamed mostly on environmental politicians. Instead, it was the result of several major factors, including the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, Hitler's own charisma and propaganda, and, most importantly, the Great Depression of 1929. As the first speaker, I'll be focusing on how the Great Depression worsened by the Weimar government's economic decisions, devastated Germany, and gave Hitler a chance to rise. After the crisis of hyperinflation in 1923, Foreign Minister Gustav Stresemann introduced the Dawes Plan in 1924, which brought in huge American loans to rebuild the economy. This seemed like a recovery, but it was a fragile one. Between 1924 and 1930, Germany borrowed over 25 billion marks from the US, and the money propped up the industry and paid reparations. Historian Richard Evans describes this as a prosperity built on unstable foundations of foreign credit. When the Wall Street crash hit in 1929, the US demanded its money back, and Germany's entire economy collapsed almost overnight. Businesses were shut down, factories closed, and by 1932, over 6.6 million Germans were unemployed. Industrial output fell by nearly half, and the Weimar government, under Chancellor Heinrich Brüning, made things worse by adopting harsh economic measures. He raised taxes and cut wages and benefits, believing it would stabilize Germany. Instead, it deepened suffering and anger. Ordinary Germans felt completely abandoned, just like after the Treaty of Versailles. They saw their leaders as weak,
20 seconds.
and out of touch. This growing resentment made them terrified from democratic parties and looked for someone who could help strength, pride, and hope. And that person was Adolf Hitler. He offered jobs, unity, and revenge against those who had ruined Germany. This propaganda blamed the environmental politicians for the depression, and people believed him. As historian Alan Wald said, the depression put the blame in Hitler's sails.
Continue.
As the second
Louder.
I'm going to talk about the Treaty of Versailles, which played a major role in Hitler's rise. Because of the harsh term, especially the war of guilt, have you heard a military description whereby in 1999 Germany was defeated and present with this term by victorious Allied power. Germany was not invited to negotiate and was given an autonomous sign, the treaty for peace with peace. So it resulted in a Treaty of Versailles imposed severe penalties on Germany, where the German Empire was militaries were taken away, military was then drastically reduced, and peace repression was demanded. So while the Roman government survived in 1930, the treaty terms created conditions that later in Hitler rise to power. For example, like the step in the back, yes, where in the end of the World War I, Germany offered an reciprocal paying for family extinction on the Woodrow Wilson Fortune agreements. Instead, Germany was forced to accept the last step with no chance to negotiate. So basically, many Germany viewed the treaty as humiliation and unfair. So they considered the Weimar politician who signed it as the murderer.
30 seconds.
Hitler adopted and applied this myth, blaming the Weimar politician over the criminal for the battle, where in his book, in May 12, 1955, Hitler wrote the German army was standing by Russia's extension.
ladies and gentlemen, as the third speaker of the opposing team, I'm going to present the point that it was not just the Weimar politicians. Hitler's own charisma and propaganda helped in, let's say, helping him enjoy this power. Now, how would I say that? Well, as you can see, he is mainly popular due to his accolades. Not only was he a decorated war veteran from World War I, he was also honored the Iron Cross, which is a very high honor amongst the German military. He held very strong conservative beliefs, which the German people really were attracted to. They were very conservative people, and they believed in traditional family value and Christian values. Aside from that, Hitler presented himself as a very strong and ideal leader. He used fascism and scapegoat politics to, let's say, place the blame on already feared and hated groups, such as the Jews and communists, as you can tell. And aside from that, he said that these specific groups, they could be blamed for Germany's hardships. So the economic crises they were facing, they would use that and utilize it to exploit the people's trust and blame it on specific groups. That way, with a common enemy, Hitler was able to combine the German people together and bring him up amongst the political ladder in Germany. Also, when he was part of
30 seconds.
part of the NSDAP, he also led the Munich Putsch, which proves that he is indeed popular even before his appointment as chancellor. And that's all I have.
Okay.
Hello everyone. As the speaker number 4, today I will be explaining why Article 48 and the Enabling Act were very important in helping Hitler rise to power, and it wasn't only the Weimar government. These were not small issues. They were legal rules that allowed Hitler to take control and destroy democracy. First, Article 48, this rule let the president make decisions without the Riksdag in an emergency. It was meant to protect Germany, but it was used many times during crises like economic depression and political unrest. Hitler used Article 48 after the Riksdag fire in 1933 to suspend freedom, arrest opponents, and scare his rivals. This gave him a big chance to weaken opposition legally and quickly, which would have been much harder in normal democratic ways. Secondly, the Enabling Act of 1933. This law let Hitler make laws without asking the Riksdag, which ended democracy. It allowed him to control the government, ban opposition, and reshape Germany according to Nazi ideas. The act let him become a dictator in just a few weeks. This change were made easier by the mistake of the Weimar government. The government was weak, with short life coalitions, frequent changes, and too much reliance on Article 48. Leaders like President Hindenburg and other conservatives thought that they could control Hitler and use him to stabilize Germany, but this miscalculation let Hitler use Article 48 and the Enabling Act to take full control. Together, Article 48 and the Enabling Act turned legal rules into tools for dictatorship. Hitler didn't take power by rebellion alone. He used the law and the weaknesses of the government to gain control legally. These laws were not just small helpers. They were essential for his rise because without them, the Weimar Republic could have stopped him. In conclusion, Article 48 and the Enabling Act were key legal tools
Time.
to make Hitler. Okay.
Continue.
As the last speaker of this group, I want to end this debate with much convincing point that actually contribute to Hitler's rise to power. Factor number 1, it is fear of communism. It is not Weimar weakness. It pushed many Germans, especially the elites, which is the big industrialists, to support Hitler. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, Germans feared a similar uprising will destroy their business, property, and traditional value. Huge businessmen and industrialists began funding the Nazi Party to prevent a communist revolution. In 1933, President Hindenburg and conservative politicians like Franz von Papen supported Hitler's appointment as Chancellor, believing he would stop communism and stabilize the nation. This proved that Hitler's rise was heavily supported by fear and self-interest, not because of the Weimar government structure. The elite support, motivated by anti-communist sentiment by the Nazis, play a decisive role in bringing him to power. Factor number 2. Use of violence and intimidation. Another reason for Hitler's rise was the Nazi Party's systemic use of violence and intimidation, not the weakness of the Weimar government. Through paramilitary groups like the SA, which is the brown shirt, the Nazis create fear, suppress opposition, and project
20 seconds.
an image of strength and discipline that appeal to a nation. They disrupt communist and socialist rallies, intimidate voters, and create the illusion that only the Nazi could restore order. This shows that Hitler's rise to power came not from a weak government system but from a fear, force, and manipulation. The Nazi used violence as a tool to silence opponent and control the streets, which contributed to Hitler's rise to power. The final point: failure of other
Time.
political party and
Okay, thank you for both sides for your pointers. Now we give you chance for both to reiterate their pointers and also the other team to rebut and so on and so forth. Okay. We shall start with the proposing team. Who's going to start first? Clarify your pointer, which one to argue, and you must convince your pointer.
Discuss today.
Continue.
Earlier, Jada mentioned, and she had intentionally agreed on the proposing team's view, where Weimar government is responsible. She said Weimar's government made things worse during the hyperinflation crisis, and that indicates that you actually agreed to our statement. Instead of arguing that hyperinflation of the Great Depression were external factors beyond Weimar's control, you showed that it is not true. Because hyperinflation was worsened by Weimar's reckless monetary policy and inability to manage reparations effectively, as you mentioned, and also how the Great Depression's impact in Germany was intensified because the government responded with harsh austerity measures, cutting spending and increasing taxes while millions went unemployed. The desperation, fears, and humiliation here that showed in your statement clearly indicates how the proposing team's arguments are more valid. Because instead of standing to your opposing views, you unintentionally agree to ours.
Thank you. Anyone to rebut from the other side? Anyone to want to add on to that? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Tisha, for reiterating whatever Jada said. While yes, she unintentionally agreed to your statement, what we meant to say was that the Weimar politicians indirectly contributed to Hitler's popularity. Now, what we are trying to argue here that it's not just them. The question says, Weimar politicians were mostly, what's that? Can you guys reread the question for me? The question is that we're mostly responsible. Weimar politicians were mostly responsible for Hitler's rise to power in January 1933. It says mostly, didn't say entirely. You are here to say, I'm sorry, speaker 2. Your statement is that the Weimar politicians did contribute, and with the implication that they did contribute almost entirely. What we're here to say is that no, Hitler himself has his own appeals, and we're trying to say that also that people themselves have a part in Hitler's rise to power. What you think? Now, to continue our argument, we want to ask you guys that do the people have no part in the Weimar Revolution? Do the people have no part in the Weimar democracy? That is my question to you.
Well, proposing team, you have a question there for you to answer. Better be quick. opposition team posed a question about do the people had no part in the Weimar's democracy. So how are you going to answer that? Trying to push on that it wasn't the Weimar's Weimar politicians were the ones responsible, mostly responsible. Anybody? Yes. No chat GPT, please.
Oh man, this is a debate, bro.
Time. Opposing team, another pointer that you may want to, I know since they have no response. Whoever. Both sides have a lot of flaws that you can actually pinpoint to attack. Okay? It's a debate. But okay, whoever starts first, whoever stands up first. Next one, take one. We're losing grounds here. Nobody's prepared. Okay.
Alright, so which speaker mentioned the video present? Okay, I'm not going over you. Which speaker mentioned Puppet? Or the appointment of Hitler as chancellor? Oh, thank you. Can you please reiterate your point because we want to analyze it again? Just shorter, yeah. Just give us a short sample.
So, President Paul von Hindenburg believed that by appointing him as the chancellor, they could control him. But this appointment allowed Hitler to take control again and give him the chance to undermine the Weimar government. So, this whole idea of giving the authority to someone who had the intent on destroying the democracy enabled Hitler to rise to power. So, this showed that the Weimar politicians opened the door for him to rise to power.
Thank you. Now, maybe the Weimar politicians did open the door for Hitler to become a person in power. But who welcomed him to their yard? Now, Hitler himself, he has a lot of influence amongst the German people, even before he was appointed as chancellor. Now, years before that, let's say around 1925, around, let's say, 1926, around the Munich Putsch. Now, by that point, when he was performing the putsch, he had around 3,000 people supporting him. What does that say about Hitler's popularity? Why would you agree that when politicians were mostly responsible for his rise to power? Why wouldn't you say that the people did love Hitler as a leader? Why would you say, and why would you underestimate Hitler's impact amongst Germany's politicians? And of course, maybe Papen had the most influence on Hitler's rise to power, but what of his influence as a veteran, as a conservative leader, as a leader of the NSDAP? Why would you underestimate his claim as the Nazi Party's leader? Please answer.
2 versus 1, 2 versus 0. Okay, crowd for everybody. Yeah, alright.
As you were saying that Papen was not mostly responsible for Hitler's power, but if Papen didn't appoint him as a chancellor, even with the support of people, he will not be able to rise to power.
Object. You are not properly answering the question. I said, why are you why is the speaker underestimating Hitler's power and influence before Papen influenced him into becoming a person of power?
No, like, imagine this, yeah?
Why would I imagine? This already happened.
No. For instance,
Unless the speaker has no evidence.
if Weimar government was powerful and have a good military, do you think that people can talk publicly about the Weimar government.
Then why was Hitler popular and why were 3,000 people walking with Hitler during the Munich Putsch?
It's because Weimar government was treating them bad.
Then why are you arguing on theoretics? We're talking about facts here. Why are you arguing why are you arguing?
The Nazi party votes.
If you are unable to follow through on your statement.
Order.
Sorry, Speaker.
The Nazi party vote share skyrocketed from under 3% in 1928 to 37% in 1932, not because it suddenly appeared pervasive, but because people had lost all faith in Weimar government. This collapse of trust.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Speaker
Order.
Committee motion.
Are we done?
No. This collapse of trust was remarkable. It was their weak leadership, reckless economic decisions, and failure to defend democracy that turned desperation into dictatorship.
And still you are not answering my question. I asked you, Speaker, why would you underestimate Hitler's rise to power? Why would you underestimate Hitler's influence? Yet again, yes, you mentioned the votings during 1932, which was when Hitler was appointed as Chancellor. Yes, during 1932, it was up to 37%. However, before he even became Chancellor, when he was just this big guy in a big party, he already had 18.25% in the Weimar cities. That's already most than other parties can commit to. Why would you still underestimate the NSDAP's influence and Hitler's power?
It doesn't have to be you who answered. It can be any others. Instead of showing your nose, you can just rise up.
Do you think with Hitler's own appeal and charisma, and he was able to rise up this stair? Because if you think about it, if Weimar doesn't give Hitler any advantage to exploit his opportunity to rise, for example, during the hyperinflation crisis, if Hitler, let's say, Weimar government, wait, I am not done speaking, presentation.
No, please, you're arguing, no, please.
I'm not trying to argue, I'm not trying to answer your question, I'm trying to point out something that
Sure. I object.
Wait. You are neglecting the fact that if Weimar government didn't open the space for Hitler to take advantage, for example, if the Weimar government can handle the government way better, do you think Hitler actually stand a chance even with his little influence? You explained that he was able to increase the votes for chair, and then that talks about his influence basically. But do you think just by that itself, and no way of Hitler sneaking in for him to rise, do you think he's able to actually climb up the staircase?
Are you finished? Alright. Then if you're going by that logic, since the Weimar politicians failed with hyperinflation, yes, which treaty caused that hyperinflation? Which treaty caused Germany to go into such debt?
Treaty of Versailles.
Yes,
And the Weimar government.
and who agreed with those treaties?
The Weimar government.
No, aside from that, the countries. If you're going by that logic, why not say Great Britain influenced Hitler's rise to power? Italy influenced Hitler's rise to power. Other countries. If you're going by that logic, then why not mention those other countries and just the Weimar politicians?
Because in the end, the people, the citizens, they don't
But the
actually
people
have
are
the full
part-
rights to actually agree, to actually end up with their conclusion. It was the Weimar government itself who signed the Treaty of Versailles.
Speaker 2, you're still going by that same logic. If that's how you're going with it, why not mention the other countries that made them sign the Treaty of Versailles? Why not go ahead and say that? After all, the Weimar politicians' mistakes, people only view it as just a myth. The backstab myth was a, let's say, story created amongst the people, and that really whirled up their feelings. And where did they bring those feelings? To the extremist parties, yes, right? And against the Weimar politicians. So they are directly involved with it, But with your logic, we can say Great Britain was involved with Hitler's rise to power. And I ask you this, were they involved?
If anybody else who answers,
To keep on saying about TOP, right? Since you keep on learning about the politicians of Weimar, why don't we say about like your Adolf Hitler's accomplices who helped him rise to power instead? I mean, you have like SA and you know, no, I'm not saying that. You have SA and SS who helped him rise to power and with that stabilizing the foundation of being within that status, being a chancellor. And, they have like what's up? That helped Adolf Hitler rise to power. Besides our negligence, we have like Joseph Goebbels who helped.
it doesn't have to be you answer.
Now listen to me.
Right,
Speaker
right.
5.
Okay.
Let
Here's
him
the thing.
finish first.
Oh, fine. I'll let you finish.
Joseph Goebbels,
Actually, I'll let you finish.
who was the Nazi party's propaganda leader. He portrayed Hitler as a savior who would bring unity, jobs, and national strength. Nazis used modern methods, mass rallies, really a cult of Weimar, chancellor, which is called Weimar and president. This powerful image drew millions to the Nazis because it's far beyond what government failures alone could achieve. I mean, those factors itself attribute to his rise of power, right? And Hitler's own charisma and vision made him uniquely appealing. Well, us, we made the decisions, but the one that was making, made those uprising feeling of making him chancellor or being what he's capable of being the ruler of Germany. Yeah, that. So he had accomplices. So you think it's just ours, political, Weimar politicians, or also his accomplices that helped him rise to power?
So you're posing the question.
Yeah, it's not just TOP. Like, sure, TOP was the one doing those. Right, the politics.
Can you please reiterate your question to me again?
Like, not just TOP, since you
So
keep
you-
on going on about TOP was the one caught by us, right? So, is it SA and his accomplices made him?
No, okay. Speaker 5, thank you for your pandering. Now, I would like to say that yes, well, his accomplices have a major part in helping him. Who was leader of the NSDAP at that time? Hitler. Who else would be able to appoint those people aside from Hitler? If you have evidence telling me that there's another leader aside from Hitler that to appoint those people, please, I open the floor to anyone who can say that. Please rebut me, any one of you. And yet again, Speaker 5, you are not answering the question. Weimar politicians, we are not talking about the Weimar politicians' mistakes that led to Hitler's rise to power. Please, if anyone is able to come up with a valid argument that Hitler did not contribute to his own success, I would like you to open up. Okay, like I said, you guys mentioned only the Weimar politicians, but your points are all about the Weimar politicians' problems, their mistakes. The question is not about that. If you're about to say that, then it would indirectly help Hitler's rise to power. My question to you is that I forgot my question. No, I did not say that. The question before this. What did I say?
Alright, let's just give everyone 1 minute of the summary to convince why you are on the better side. Sit down, relax, take a deep breath. Okay, so now we are going to look into, you basically are going to just summarize once again and reinstate balik whatever that you feel is your most important element of your team. Okay? Remember, I think many of you have swayed away from the main context here. Question is, Weimar politicians were mostly responsible for Hitler's rise to power. Okay? So stick to that particular juncture. Convince us, convince each other, convince us all which one is, what were your main pointers and how that actually contributes to Weimar, mostly responsible for Hitler's rise to power. right. But come on, time's almost up. Come on. Oh, someone. But one last one. Okay, we'll start with the proposing team. Just to close, okay? I'm sure everybody has taken a deep breath already. Calm down, I suppose. Okay?
Okay, so about my point, it's about political weakness and the loss of faith in the government. And this is because for the Weimar government, they are unstable. So when they're not stable, how could the people trust them to protect them when they cannot even stand their own democracy? So in people suffering, Hitler found his opportunity. So it's like an opportunity for him to take the spotlight. He didn't create the desperation, he exploited it. He turned the people's despair into a political advantage. This is why we can say with certainty it was not fate, chance, or foreign crisis alone that brought Hitler to power. It was the failure of the Weimar government to develop the country and its people.
Okay? Yeah, thank you. The opposing team.
Anything that relates to anything that relates to